because it seems as though there is a coordinated attempt by a local group that is hired by foreign lobbies and quite a few people from international organizations who cannot stop any production of fossil fuel in their own countries, but have an agenda as it relates to small developing countries and their production of oil and gas. In fact, I believe it's a selfish agenda. These international organizations want to prevent the development of the oil and gas sector in Latin America and the Caribbean, and in Africa in particular, so that they will continue to have global dominance in the production of fossil fuel.
Since the market is narrowing, the demand is narrowing because of climate change, they want to preserve that market for themselves. And therefore, they're using these so-called friends of the earth and organizations that profess to be concerned about the environment to effectively block in developing countries the development of these sectors. Because they can't do that in their own countries. For example, in the United States of America, they have now expanded the oil and gas industry to a level beyond any previous level of production any time in their history. That is where they are today. And that has grown enormously over the past several years. In the United Kingdom, they have reopened coal-fired gas plants, coal-fired plants to generate electricity. They have issued over 100 new permits for exploration for oil and gas in that country. And I can list the developed countries and what they're doing in terms of expanding production of fossil fuel. But these same countries or the same or some of the northern NGOs are collaborating with the local ones in spreading fear in many of these countries about the production of oil and gas. And so we have seen that happening here in Guyana. We have seen several attempts locally to block the gas to energy project. We have seen by some local NGOs operating at the behest and on behalf of and paid for by some international NGOs. We have seen them now create this great fear about potential oil spill in the country and our capacity to address this. So over time, we have been explaining about the growth in national capacity to address the oil and gas sector. I was pleased that the head of the EPA spoke about this matter sometime in the past, because there's been lots of questions about the adequacy of resources to address any potential oil spill. And so now we know that there is insurance to address of up to $600 million to address a single event. Secondly, that there is a $2 billion parent guarantee. That is all the co-ventures combined had to give a guarantee of $2 billion. Further, we have argued that the asset base of the company here, the local company, could be used to address the liabilities arising out of any potential oil spill. But the head of the EPA has also addressed another issue, which is the adequacy of all of these resources. So many people have been saying that this may be inadequate. We believe it's a substantial amount of resources. He was speaking about the Environmental Protection Act. He said, in the words of the act, it is strict liability. What that means that if you're a permit holder, you're fully responsible and fully liable for any pollution that you cause, and that does not have to be proven. So the EPA Act already deals with full liability outside of the insurance that I spoke of, the parent guarantee, and recourse to the substantial asset base. But the Act mandates full liability on behalf of the permit holder. In this case, the permit holder is the company producing here. But this is not adequate for us. The EPA legislation, although it speaks to full liability, is not adequate. And that is why we have indicated that we are working on a new bill to be tabled in the Parliament. By tonight, we will receive the first draft of the bill, and that would be sent to different departments of the government, the EPA, Bharrat, the AG's Chamber, CDC, etc., for the first round of discussions. But we plan to table this bill and hopefully have it passed before the recess, which is in August. And the name of the bill would be National Oil Incident, Emergency Response, and Financial Responsibility Bill 2024. So this will greatly enhance our capability to not just hold those responsible for any potential polluting activity, not just the oil and gas producers or the oil companies, but shipping companies and others, to hold them fully liable, but also ensure that people, if their activities are affected, they will be fully compensated for those any loss that they incur because of a potential oil spill. Now, on the other hand, we have mandated that Exxon develop their capability, their local capability, this is through the environmental permit, to quickly address a spill should it occur. And that is why we have asked that they have the cap in stock available in the country, which can plug an oil spill immediately should this occur. And that was not available in many other parts of the world when they had environmental disasters. So I just wanted to address this one issue because there have been several articles and several discussion groups, and I see somebody from Trinidad saying he's concerned about oil spill here in Guyana affecting the Trinidadian fishermen. When they were producing oil and gas for 100 years, they were not worried about an oil spill occurring or in Trinidad affecting our fishermen. So the steps we are taking to address this issue are way beyond what many other countries have been doing. We're not just ensuring that there is that we have financial means to do so, that to address the problem, but we also have the law backing us so that should any such incident were to happen, then we'd be ready to address it. So since I'm on the Exxon on oil spill and the oil and gas sector, I heard today that Exxon did a briefing about their investments in Guyana. And so I have here a document that apparently they circulated. And they asked, and they just put at the bottom here, not for reprint, background only. I think it was shared to the media at a briefing session. Now, I looked through this, and obviously Exxon is trying to defend its position and its investment in Guyana. And they're free to do that. To share their perspective on the substantial investments they've made and how this is impacting the country generally and the future that they expect in the sector. But what I've seen here is that somehow Exxon wants to speak about the revenue. Now, we already agreed that because of a poor PSA, a flawed PSA signed in 2016 by Trotman, that we're getting less than a fair deal. And we have admitted this, we have a long time back. That is why we have changed the current PSA. We have changed it substantially so that in future we will get substantially more tax revenues from this activity. Now, what Exxon is trying to do, they want to take credit for the substantial investment and production, but also take credit for our tax revenue. Now, these tax revenues are part of normal way of doing business in a country. You pay your taxes. So they have showed, they want to speak about the national budget, and they have shown the growth in the national budget from 2020 to now, and somehow is attributing this to their tax revenue. Now, you've heard me said before that this year, that although we have a $1.1 trillion budget, less than 30% will come from the oil and gas sector. But somehow they want to create the impression that this massive budget that we have this year is fully financed from their tax payments. Now, this is very misleading. What Exxon should focus on is how much money they're making. That's what they should tell the reporters, not how much taxes we're collecting. Because this is already we agree that this tax take is lower than what we should be getting. And this is not really taxes, because none of this comes from taxes except the 2% the royalty. So it's not really a tax because they pay zero tax. This is the profit share. And we all agreed that if we had a better PSA, the profit share should have been higher in the initial stage. But this is, so when Exxon does its own PR, I would urge them to keep away from this and maybe talk more about the big question that people have been asking, how much money they make on this matter. It irks me as the same way that they did these billboards, that they look like they're financing all of our activities in this country. I pointed out that in this year's budget, our non-oil revenue is much more than oil revenue in financing the budget. It's over $400 billion of non-oil revenue that goes to finance the budget, and just about $300 billion that comes from the oil and gas sector. So this is, I called them and I said to them, in future, please stay away from this. You talk more about how much you're making. And I hope that the reporters ask them that, not to talk much about our share, our part of the profit sharing, but how much in this period, in the 5 years, since they calculated not the royalty payments, but the profit share that we receive over the last 4 or 5 years, they should have done the same, how much they received in this period. I hope that you ask them that. The other thing I wish to speak on, again on the oil and gas sector, is Nigel Hughes and saying, ill-prepared oil producing Guyana heading down a road to chaos. Now, the headline says, lack of capacity will see foreigners reshaping country, Nigel Hughes. And then he speaks about several issues. He speaks about, we have not begun to demand of our government what is their plan as to how they're going to be dealing with this revenue throughout the economy. We're going to be in chaos. We're going to be like a kid in a candy shop with more money, and we're going to die of diabetes. There is no plan whatsoever as to how we are going to manage the economy across the board. We don't have the capacity. He goes on to say we are doing zero planning. Now, Nigel Hughes doesn't know what he's talking about. Nigel Hughes is, every time we have elections, he resurfaces and tries to sound profound. It's a lot of nonsense that he is talking here. In fact, if anything, you would know that in our manifesto, even before we returned to office in 2020, we outlined the sectors, our plan for the sector. We outlined the things that we wanted done to strengthen management and regulation, and we did those things. We outlined the reform of the NRF for greater transparency and in the use of the resources. We spoke about building local capacity for investments and supply of goods and services by having a local content law, which we passed. And as a result of that, many other Guyanese now, or tons of Guyanese companies have been benefiting from about 700 million US of procurement opportunities. In the same law, we prohibited the use of foreign skills if we had the comparable local skills here, so that they would have to build capacity. We have, in the same law, we forced the companies to outline their 5 years plan and how they will build local capacity, the training of Guyanese, etc. We are now building a college in Berbice to train more people for the oil and gas sector. We have funded tons of other programs, training programs, to build capacity. We outlined what we wanted to do with gas, the gas strategy. This was long before we got into office, a gas strategy to monetize gas. We're on the course to do this. We outlined how we'll use gas to generate power, to bring cheaper, reliable power to the people of this country. We have done that. We said we'll reform the PSA. We have done that. We said we'll reform the petroleum activities, the Petroleum Act. We have not just reformed it, but updated it in a new act now, the Petroleum Activities Bill. We have gone to auction. All of these things were outlined before we got into office. This is a government that knew what it wanted to do long before it got into office. We then, in the same manifesto, we said the sectors, we outlined the sectors in which we will spend the resources going forward. So when he said we have no plan, we outlined what the plan will be for oil and gas resources. We said that a substantial part of the resources will be saved in the NRF for intergenerational equity. We have established the NRF, and that is happening. Secondly, we said a substantial amount of money from the oil and gas sector will be invested in education. As a result of this, we have 50,000 people who are being trained now, 50,000 Guyanese who are benefiting from this. We're writing off the about maybe 11 to 13 billion dollars of loans for those in the University of Guyana. We plan to possibly help those who had to pay their loans in the past, because we recognize it wouldn't be fair if we write off from those who didn't pay. But the people who paid from their own resources, they would not have benefited from the current write-off. We're doing that. We announced free university education from next year. We're using nearly $10 billion now for a grant for the children. This is what we're doing. We've outlined. And that's where we're spending the resources. We said in our manifesto too, this was even before government, we said we'll invest in a world-class health system. We're building 12 new hospitals and upgrading the entire system. I don't want to belabor it. We said in the manifesto we will build infrastructure for the future that will support economic infrastructure, that will support a diversified economy so that we avoid the Dutch disease. And we're doing that. You see the infrastructure rollout across the country. Ports, power plants, cokers, highways, etc. We said we will do some conditional cash transfer, and we've started this with people for vulnerable groups. We started with the pensioners, our children, and also people with disability. And that will grow to other sectors. We outlined all of this. Imagine Nigel Hughes in 2024 saying this government doesn't have a plan as to how to utilize oil and gas resources. This is what you have to deal with. It's nonsense, and that the next 5 years will be chaos if we're not clear about it. We're clear where this country will be by 2030, now and in 2030. We are clear about every sector, what kind of education system we'll have by then, the world-class health system, the security, a whole range of other things. And here they're talking about how foreigners will reshape our country. Foreigners can't reshape the country. They will do that under APNU, where they had no planning capability, and they couldn't even stand up to a mediocre investor, much less an ExxonMobil. And we've seen this manifested in real things. Over a weekend, Trotman signed the new PSA. Guess who drafted the cabinet paper to take the draft PSA that Trotman signed to the cabinet for approval? Guess who drafted that? Not the government officials. ExxonMobil drafted the cabinet paper, not the PSA, because I suspected they drafted the PSA too. But they drafted the cabinet paper to say to the cabinet, you have to approve this PSA. ExxonMobil drafted that. And you're talking about capacity and about who will allow foreigners to reshape this country. We're clear. That is why we have launched the project, the biometrics project. The biometrics project that we have that is ongoing will give each person, every Guyanese, they would have an ID card, one for citizens and one for non-citizens, so that we know who is in our country, every foreigner who is in our country, and we can track what they do in our country. Because you wouldn't be able to open a bank account or anything else except unless you have one of those cards as a citizen or a non-citizen. So we track everyone who is in this country. And we are making it sure that our people, the people of this country, our people would have first preference in any case. That's why when Exxon threatened, and not Exxon alone, but all of the others said, if you pass the local content law, that we may go out of business. We said, well, fine, you may have to go out of business, but we passed the law. And they had to live with it, and they're doing well. But if we didn't pass that law and listen to the threats from these companies, 1,500 Guyanese companies would not be benefiting from $700 million of procurement opportunity today, because the French company would still be supplying food to the offshore people. And you'd have had foreigners coming in here and building homes and apartments and renting it to the Exxon staff. Now they can't do that. If you're in the oil and gas sector, you have to rent from Guyanese. That is a prohibition. Security services, only Guyanese can supply that. Cleaning services, a whole range of other services. We carve these out exclusively for our people. You think a Nigel Hughes because he was working for ExxonMobil. You recall? The PSA, I think the PSA has his address, his office address as their local office. So you think they would have done that? We urged them from opposition to defend local interests, and they did not. They could have easily passed the local content law too. They did not. So this is something that we need to tackle. And since I'm on this issue of Nigel Hughes, maybe I just continue in the same vein. So many of you know that Nigel Hughes, a few weeks ago, took objection to the police describing his client as a male Negro person. And so since then, he has written to the ERC, and they have public meetings now, playing on this, banish the N-word. Now, the N-word is not Negro. The N-word is another word. But playing on people's emotions. So, what are the facts? Every one of you here know who's gone to the police, or maybe even at the hospital, that when they write up your chart, they often put East Indian or Negro. This is not today, since the colonial era. It's nothing new. The police, that's what they describe you, East Indian or Negro. That is from the colonial era. Nigel Hughes is fully aware of this. I have had my staff research how many cases he has taken to court in the past where his clients gave statements to the police and they were described as a young male Negro, etc. He saw those statements. He never objected in the past. You can have maybe 50 cases I can find where he saw this before. And he's not started practicing recently. He's been practicing a long time. So all of this, in the 5 years under APNU 2, it was there. In the 28 years under the PNC, it was there. Since colonial period. Now, on the day that Kidaki Amsterdam was arrested, and he was arrested for allowing a person on his program to say that he will cut off the head of the president, Anil Nandalal, Ashni Singh, my head, and put them on a stake by the seawall. So on that day, suddenly Nigel Hughes realized that the statement that he saw taken by the police had male Negro, described this as male Negro. It was a classic case of misdirection. So you create an issue about a matter that is not new because you know it's emotional. And you forget that there is a threat to kill the president, chop off his head, and everything else. It is the usual way of operating. Now, they have a public meeting on this. They wrote the ERC. Today at Cabinet, the issue came up, and the Cabinet uniformly said, we will accept, if these are old colonial things, because many people, I don't want to be called East Indian. I'm not an East Indian too. I'm not from the East Indian. It's part of it's not nationality, it's ethnicity that sometimes they describe. But I'm Guyanese too. And nobody has ever used at the press conferences, in our speeches, etc. It's mainly Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, Amerindians. But we will consult with the people who matter, but not Nigel Hughes and Felix. Felix is the main offending character. He's resurfaced now. He, under the police, under his tenure, probably used this 1 billion times. And suddenly he finds the word offensive, the Negro word, because they're looking every day to resuscitate racism. Racism, it's all that they have to mobilize people. And so they're looking for emotional issues now. You know, people would say, how dare they this description, and that somehow blame the PPP for this. It's been wrong since colonial era. This is all that Nigel Hughes is capable of. Not just misdirection, but this attempt to have now a public meeting on this matter. All they had to do was to call the president and say, we're not happy with this. You know, it doesn't really fit into how people feel about this matter. Why not? Let's change it. And they would have had a receptive ear. Like the cabinet today said, people's sensibilities should prevail. What people prefer themselves to be described as, we don't have a problem with that. Because it's something that, you know, it's not part of our law. It is how people have been described, particularly in police reports. You don't find it elsewhere, only in the police report or in some cases in the hospital since colonial era. But for them now, it's a big political issue, as though it was the PPP who, and trust me, with these characters here, you will hear that it's the PPP or Jagdeo caused this to happen now. There's nothing. They have absolutely nothing except racism to mobilize people. And I see, let me deal with a few other matters that we spoke of in the past. So I had reported already that the Minister of Finance has had a meeting with all the sub-treasuries around the country. In the past, I think 2 weeks ago, I spoke about a large number of people who are having a difficult time receiving their payments even after they've completed work for the government. And that sometimes people slow this down deliberately at the processing level. The clerk sits on the payment sheet, or it never moves forward to the accounting officer's level so that the payment could be effected, and then they request people to pay them money to expedite it. So the Minister of Finance has spoken to the sub-treasuries and to the Accountant General's Department about this matter. And we will hold the people, the accounting officers in the ministries and the other agencies responsible for the breaches here. So he's already had that engagement at that level. We will give it a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, to see how it's working. And if the complaints that I receive from time to time, people come to Freedom House or the office of the president to complain about this, and they go to the president too, then we will have to take other steps to address this. But we will, first of all, see whether the engagement the Minister of Finance had with the accounting officers and those responsible for processing payments, whether this has led to an improvement in this situation. Now, I can understand people holding things up if they're not clear. For example, if the requisite documents are not submitted, the bills are not there, or the work has not been certified, and the people are coming for payment because you need the work to be certified. But not when all of that has been done. People have to wait 2-3 months to get their payments, because many of them have loans at the bank. Many may be, have a working capital that they have to service those, particularly contractors and suppliers, even small people. I'm not talking about the large ones too. I'm talking about people with very small sums that they have to collect from the ministries. So that has been done. We have already started in many cases to address liquidating damages for contractors who have gone beyond the period for the implementation of the contract. So as you know, many of the contractors in their contract have to put up a performance bond. And the state can draw down on the performance bond should they not complete the contract or complete it on time. So in the past, a lot of people who had not completed their work, there was a lax view of implementing or instituting liquidating damages. So, and liquidating damages simply mean for every day you delay after the project should have ended, as per contract, you have to start paying the government. There's a penalty, a daily penalty for every day that you're late in completing the contract. So the government has started doing that in many of the areas. Now, many companies, banks and insurance companies, are the ones that provide the performance bond. So I want to urge the banks and the insurance companies too, that if you're giving a performance bond, you better make sure that your client is doing the work too. Because at the end of the day, we will come against the bond that you have issued. And therefore, the insurance company or the bank will be called upon to perform, and because we'll draw down on the bond from them. And so I hope that they are also paying keen attention to this matter, because sometimes they think that the issuance of these performance bonds is risk-free. But if your client doesn't perform, then the state has every intention of calling in the bond. And we're doing this with greater frequency now. There have been a clear instruction across the board that this should be done. Now, there are some mitigating factors. For example, if you have like an extended rainy period, then people can get an extension of the contract, because if they have to, say, pave and you have 2 months of rain, continuous rain, then under the FIDIC book, the engineering book, they allow for extension on the basis of circumstances that are beyond the control of the contractor. But those are rare occurrences. So I want to put on notice, again, not just the contractors, but the insurance companies and the banks that are issuing these bonds, that we intend to levy on these bonds, to take the bonds. A number of contracts have also been canceled for people who can't complete the contracts. So let me also indicate that if you have contracts that you haven't completed, then that goes against your track record when you bid again. So in the past, we may have, because of the paucity of contractors, may have turned a blind eye to some of these. When people don't complete, then they get another work somewhere else. But more and more, this is going to be a factor in ensuring that people are penalized for not implementing or completing their contracts. A few months ago, also, I think it was Skychor News that asked about their foreign currency situation. And I had indicated at that time that we continuously monitor the foreign exchange market. We know that with a rapid growing economy and with a increase in imports, that there will be greater demand for foreign currency. Our import this year on the current account of the balance of payment would be over $5 billion. Last year, it was about $6 billion, but that had some elements of the FPSO coming in. So that's natural that once the economy is growing, there will be a greater demand for foreign currency, for legitimate transactions, that is to import more goods, to import more machinery and equipment, consumer goods, to make payments for a lot of the intermediate goods. And therefore, that the market may experience from time to time some mismatches. So far, we had seen that overall, the market was clearing itself. Although there was a wait list for a number of people, importers, that the market was clearing itself. Because on a daily basis, we watch the aggregate foreign currency available to the bank and their aggregate demand. Some banks may have a mismatch. They may have less foreign currency and more demand, but another bank may have more foreign currency and less demand. So we look at the aggregate. And I said to you at that time that should we see any situation where the short-term mismatches would put upward pressure on the rate that is to depreciate, then the state had the capacity to intervene through the central bank. So we have, in the last week, we met with the bankers. We have seen a situation where we've had the short-term mismatch. And we've asked the central bank, last week Ashni, Minister Singh and I met with him, we've asked the central bank to make a major interjection in the foreign currency market. And this morning, most people said that the market is entirely cleared. Our capability is strong to do this several times in the year. We don't want the rate to appreciate too much because that would lead to another set of problems, but we don't want the rate to depreciate too. And therefore, we believe that the equilibrium that the rate has struck now is the ideal one for the economy. And we're keeping a close watch in the market. And as I said at that time, that when the right time comes, we will do so. The reason why we did this at this point in time, because the wait was a little bit too long. The wait was a little bit too long, and it was starting to affect people's payment. And if you have to pay, it affects your track record if you don't pay on time, etc. So there's been a major injection into the market. You're not going to see it probably everywhere in the news, but I just wanted to reinforce what I said at that time, 2 months ago, that when the market necessitates an intervention on the part of the central bank, we will do so. And we have a capability of doing so. And we have done so in this regard. I've also indicated that some time ago that there's been some concern about the gold sales to the gold board and how these have diminished over time. Now I saw Kaichur News showed a table about how the decline in sales started, or declarations basically. And they looked at it from 2019, I think. If you go back from 2015, you will see that some in 2015, 2016, production from some of the big producers started. So the APNU period benefited from the investments that took place before, but they started producing in that period. I think it was Troy and another company. And so they were declaring over 250,000 ounces of gold per year. Now those have petered out, the large companies. But we're still very concerned about what's happening in the market. And we believe that people are not selling to the gold board to avoid the taxes. And we believed at that time that it was organized and that it was having an impact because many of the legitimate dealers were saying to us that people were offering rates beyond what the market can sustain, even beyond what the international market price was. And clearly, there was a demand for the gold, not for other purposes. We believe to externalize maybe ill-gotten proceeds. So at that time, I said to you that the government had ordered a full investigation into this matter. We believe now that we're starting to, or we have enough evidence about some of the people who are involved, and you're going to see additional activities against them. And so I'm saying this to them again, because you're going to, if you're doing this, desist from doing it, because the full force of the law would be instituted against you. And I would even advocate that we amend the law to institute even more severe penalties on people who have done this or who are doing this. So I just want to forewarn those, again, who have been engaged in this practice, that we know who you are, or at least some of the key players, and the law enforcement agencies of the government are coming after you. The airport, what you saw at the airport was just a tiny manifestation of it. This was intelligence-led, and we knew they were coating the gold with silver and taking it out of the country. And so I just want to say that because several months ago we discussed this matter. And I just want to tell you that a lot of work has been done by the law enforcement agencies to understand the intelligence work, the people involved, and they're going to face the consequences. There are a few issues more that I want. From my outreach, there are several issues that came up in the outreach. So we're addressing those. But one issue that has been coming up quite a bit is how people are treated by these security companies. A lot of the the companies that provide security for the government in different parts of the country, many of them have a habit of deducting NIS payments but not making the payments. And so people, if they later have an injury or something of this sort, when they go to the NIS, they can't receive benefits. So we have ordered the NIS to have an inspection of all of these companies that are providing service on behalf of the government of Guyana, who have had contracts, And we're expecting a report in 2 weeks' time. And should we have an adverse finding in relation to particular companies on this matter, they run the risk of losing their contract. Now, people, they get paid, the security companies, they get paid for a service. They have to pay the people who are working for them. And they have to also ensure and pay them on time and ensure that their deductions for taxes and for the NIS, especially NIS, that those are remitted to the NIS. So if people suffer injury, they have recourse to get some benefits from the NIS. They have that recourse. So I just want to forewarn those also today that the people who are running these security companies. I think I'm going to end there today. There are a few other matters that I may want to speak about a little bit later. I'm extremely pleased that, as you see, the president just came from Region 1, and the response was extraordinary. People came out, they raised their issues with the president. People were very supportive of what the government has done over the several years we've been in office, the return to some dignity and viability in many of these Amerindian communities, the support they got. They were very vocal. They expressed this at several of the meetings with the president. And the president also outlined a lot of our plans for these communities. Now, in Region 1, the main issue was support for production, and also first of all, how do we do that? So the state will work with the communities to assist them in land preparation in some of the villages. We'll work with those communities to ensure that they have planting material, and then issues of transportation and processing of the production in these outlying areas. But Region 1, those were the key issues that came up on the visit. And if you read the reports, you will see all of the promises that the president made in relation to enhancing production and job creation in these communities too. We have had enormous success in returning people to work in the past 4 years we've been in office from the doldrums of APNU, when people didn't have employment. It was like you couldn't find a job in the private, you couldn't find anything to work. Large numbers of people are working, but in some regions we've been more successful than others. So that's why we're working now in the outlying areas to make sure that we can, outside of what we've done on the part-time job and expanding production, the employment through the CSOs, like in the indigenous communities, also to support economic activities, private sector economic activities that will generate more employment. We're very pleased about the interactions that the president has had in Region 1 with that community, and you've seen it. The Amerindian communities, people sometimes, APNU puts out a bridge that they built in Moruca. I saw recently they have a series called Lest We Forget. Lest We Forget. So now they put one bridge in Moruca, they built one bridge, and they expect the people, the indigenous people, to support them because of this bridge. I remember the vile words that they had to say about Region 1 because they got trashed in the 2020 elections in Region 1. And it's going to happen again next year. And so they believe it's a single bridge. So lest we forget this bridge that they built in the Moruca over a tiny creek like this. But they took away all the jobs from the people in Region 1. They started putting in taxes in both the Mabaruma end and Port Kaituma end. They started collecting taxes there from goods imported into that area when we had practically treated it as a non-tax area in the past up to 2015. They introduced taxes, collected over $4 billion. They don't remember that. They don't remember the thousands of jobs that they took away. And so we, this is why we have had in many of the local government elections, or the elections for Tushao, like I saw Garrido Low, who was a former minister under the last government, contested elections in Guyana, I think, as a Tushao, and she came number 3. Now, from a minister contesting a village election and coming in number 3 is a testimony to how little you did in those areas in your tenure. And she was in charge. She was supposed to be like sharing out resources in these communities, etc. So that's how people actually view the APNU presence. But the Lest We Forget series from APNU, it's a feeble attempt to talk about their success in the 5 years. So 500 houses built, they said. I don't know where these 500 houses that they built, but I would be ashamed to say that I built 500 houses in 5 years. I'd be really ashamed to say that. And 3.1 million housing improvement subsidies for hinterland and coastal homes. It's like so mediocre. I'm ashamed for them, but they're proud of talking about this, their record, lest we forget. Well, we're not forgetting the rigging too. We're not forgetting that, lest we forget the rigging too. Or the constitutional violations, all 18 of them. Or the not respecting the no confidence motion. Or the taking away of the children grant. We're not forgetting that, lest we forget that too. Lest we forget the 1 month bonus that they took away from the joint services. Lest we forget the 200 taxes. So I'm really sad for them. You know, it's such a, like, we really should be. I don't want to say much about their Congress, just to rub things in, but so I don't want to speak about that. Next week I'll talk about that at Freedom House. I talk about their Congress. So let me end there. Thank you. Yes, so whoever wants to start. Yeah.
Guyana Chronicle, we saw that the mayor and city council passed a budget 6 months into the year. What is your take on this?
Well, I think a lot of their councillors from our side pointed out that the budget was presented with very little information about past expenditure. And we know about the lack of audits in the city council for a large number of years. If you don't have audit, you can't verify how much you collect or spent, or collected or spent. So they operate in this opaque environment deliberately. It's not that they can't do the audit, because it's simple to get an audit done. You prepare the financial statements, and you hire an auditor. It's not that they can't do it. They want to operate in that environment, because in that environment, you can spend on whatever you want. You're not guided by a budget like up to now. They spent for the first 5 months of this year. They're not guided by a budget. So who made the call on what they spent a substantial amount of money on from January 1 of this year to June? They were not guided by a budget. So it's the mayor and a few others who will determine what they spend the money on unilaterally. They love that sort of thing. When you operate in an opaque environment, you're not guided by a document. There is room for a lot of corruption and deals, and that's what has been happening in the city council for a long, long time. And they refuse to address it, in spite of all of the efforts on our part for them to do so. And any intervention on our part is seen as though we have imperial ambitions over the city council. We want to control this. We're starving them. They don't even account for the money that they collect in taxes. I've already pointed out that because they don't have a uniform system for doing the amnesty, you can walk into the city council and the two of us, both of us owe $10 million in taxes. You would leave with a write-off of $3 million, and I'd leave with a write-off of $8 million, based on your ability to pay the people in there. So I only have to pay $2 million, you'd have to pay $7 million. But we both have the same liability. Now, if they had a uniform policy to say we are writing off 20% for everyone, or 30%, then you don't need to go and see the mayor or the deputy mayor or somebody else to get your write-off. You just go to the treasurer or the treasury department, and they apply the 20% on your liabilities, and you get it. They don't want that to work too, because they want people to go into the office and make it look like it's a personal favor that they're doing for you. So I can go through. We know this. We know that this is how APNU operates. But every time, so it's no surprise. I'm shocked that people still don't see what's happening at the city council. And that is why. So the budget came now. They're not, and most of the money in the budget now doesn't go for services again to the people of Georgetown. So guess who will have to do roads and drainage and the sluices and even and a whole range of other activities? It's the central government. And then they would claim that they're not getting support from the central government, because their budget is for a number of things. There are some dangerous things that they're suggesting, though, that to put people property on sale. And I know how this works. We met with the bankers earlier this week, and so they were asking about the strengthened provision for them to recover their collateral, so that if they make a loan and you have a bad loan, then they can go to court and get a judgment and have the judgment executed. And then that is through the sale of the property, so they can recover their collateral. They're saying that the system works slowly, so it compromises their ability to recover their capital or their bad loans, the collateral on bad loans, on loans rather. So I said to Ashni Singh, we'd look at it, but on the other hand, I've had reports where there's a collusion to sell people's property below the market value. And I don't know where it's done at the auction, because they claim it's at the auction, or in some banks. So I said, we're not going to strengthen any law unless the law allows people, and I think we're going to institute that now, where the lowest value that you can realize at the third auction for the sale of the property. So if you have a property and it's worth $50 million, and they go through the auction and a person offers $10 million and they want to sell it for $10 million, the person who owns the property should have at least 1 month to match that offer, so I can easily get it disposed of at the same price. So then that allows, if you believe that they're underselling the property, you can easily match the offer, get someone to pay that price. Maybe they'll pay twice as much, but then you will get half of it. So it's the same thing I'm worried about, that when they announce the sale of people's property, knowing the corruption in City Hall, that they can now sell off your property just like that, and through corrupt transactions. And you recall at local government elections, they were saying that it is the PPP that who will sell out your property in Georgetown if we win the local government elections. That's what they were pushing. They were saying, we're even building the boulevard, the Independence, Independence Boulevard, so that the properties there would be more attractive and we'd sell them out to people, our supporters. Now we see the true nature of APNU. So at the City Council, this is usual business there. I'm sorry I went on so long for a City Council matter there, but I'm very concerned about what's happening there.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo, Shervin Belger of Kaiser News. In the vein of capacity, it's estimated that the Trinidad Energy Department has approximately or around 18,000 people working, monitoring the day-to-day not only day-to-day activities, but even the expenditure of the oil companies and so forth there. How staffed is Guyana's energy department or oil and gas sector? Is it understaffed? Is it fully equipped? Does it have the capacity?
Okay.
Especially given the fact that we have seen some glaring findings in the recent audits involving ExxonMobil.
So, first of all, your last comment, your last sentence, that especially since the last audit finding. So that doesn't relate to in-house capacity. We, as per the PSA, and we took a deliberate decision to have an external auditor. So you don't have to build in-house capacity to do the audit. In fact, it would be unwise to do so. You should be able to buy the best expertise. We have gone today, we've advertised. In 2 instances, we've done 2 audits and we've just now advertised for the 3rd. So we will get external auditors to do the audit. They are not restricted in any way whatsoever in addressing or pursuing their terms of reference. So they have terms of reference to audit fully the costs. So if it's $7.3 billion of expenditure over a particular period, they have to do a full audit of the costs to ensure that the resources are spent, first of all, on the business and that the costs are not inflated. So that has happened twice, and it will happen in the future. We have no intention of interfering with the external auditors. Further to that, we recognize that we did not need to build an in-house capacity to review the audits. That we have the GRA, which has a petroleum division now that's been building capacity there. But we have within the GRA itself a great capacity to do audits and to advise on audits. And although the obligations to do the audit or the obligation to do the audit is a ministry's obligation according to the PSA, the ministry acts on the advice of the GRA. So we have extended our capacity to another government agency to do the audit. So you can do things without compromising by operating on inbuilt capacity elsewhere within the government and also hiring external auditors. A lot of our work, we want to hire the best capacity around the world. So when we drafted the amendments to, say, the Petroleum Act, or the new PSA, or this new environmental law, or we're doing regulations, we buy this capacity from external because they can easily, within these firms globally, they can then say to us, here are 15 countries of comparable size that have been addressing this issue, and this is how they're doing it in the country. apart from these 15 countries, another 10 countries are addressing it in a different manner. So we benefit from a global look at the particular issue. Often if you build in-house capacity, they don't have that global experience. So if you look at a lot of the work that we've been doing, we have worked on the terms of reference. So we say what we want, they do the draft, and then we adjust the draft to suit our particular conditions. And it's done in an iterative manner. So for example, when we were establishing the 10% royalty, so we said, moving from 2% to 10%, we said what royalty rate and a tax rate, a 10% tax rate, corporate tax rate, would allow us to earn more from the 2016 PSA, but still keep us globally competitive. And we started off at 5%, and then we found there was still big room. We were still very, very competitive compared to others. And then we moved up all the way to 10% royalty. So it was iterative. It's back and forth, and we did the simulations, etc. So we don't know because a country builds a capacity. So Trinidad and Tobago produces, I don't know how much now, maybe 50,000 barrels of oil, maybe around that level, and gas. But if they have 18,000 people, good luck to them, 18,000 people to do that based on what you're saying. I don't think we need 18,000 people to do that. That's like the whole public service in Guyana, the whole public service, to look at this one sector. And I think our sector is well managed. I think the Brazilian minister recently said, we should operate at the speed at which Guyana is operating. We should utilize our resources and start exploring in the equatorial region of Brazil that is offshore here in this Atlantic belt here. He is urging Brazil to do what we are doing. So clearly, I don't know. Trinidad has to decide how many people, if it wants 18,000 people working in a sector. But I believe we're doing well in this regard. We're looking out for national interests. The disagreement that exists in our society is over the PSA and the terms of the PSA. And we all agree that it's not the ideal PSA, the 2016 one. We disagree on whether you should renegotiate or not. That's the difference here. But it's not on the basis of whether we are getting the right share now, because we've demonstrated that we are getting our share, but it's a small share. It's a small share.
If I may follow up, if you could probably shed some light on how the government, you mentioned buying the best capacity. How did the process that the government go through to ensure that these capacity buying are credible and not going to be?
Yes, so we advertise. You advertise. So that's the only way you can look at it. If you go and handpick people, then they would say, look, you handpick. You advertise, they supply, and lots of these companies are globally known, but we have done something else. We look at the best global capacity, but we also want our people involved. So sometimes we take the unusual step of trying to get them to break in, like with the audit. So like Nigel, you were saying the foreigners will do everything. Look at the audit. We have 4 Guyanese companies now being part of a consortium to work along with the external groups to do our audit. We should be proud of that our own people are building the capacity to do that. It's not in government, it's in the private sector, but it's national capacity, not government capacity, but national capacity that we can turn to at any time. So we should be proud of that. But we do it often through tenders.
Any pressing like of the company background support?
Yeah, but you could so you always have issues like, I remember when IHS Markit was at the beginning were hired, there were lots of concerns about IHS market and working for the oil and gas company. But it is the same IHS market that found that Exxon did not, that we shouldn't agree to $214 million being part of the cost bank. So it's subjective often.
Dr. Jagdeo, good afternoon. You talked about the national EID cards just now. And the government would have said that the first set of EID cards would be issued in the second quarter of 2024.
I know the company is working, but there could be some delays because we have to also get the local team to manage and all of this here, because this database will be crucial for everything, for e-health program, the e-schools we want to build, a whole range of things. It would transform that entire all of these sectors, including security, police and security matters. So I don't know, there is a delay with the issuance of the ID cards, but it's a project that is alive and it's going well. We did not change the ID card requirement so this is a second ID. We didn't want to deal with the ID that GCOM issues independently, because if we had done that, you would hear APNU complain all the time about it. So this here, they would have complained up to now that we're trying to rig the elections, although they're the only riggers in our history that we know of.
On June 4, the Starbrick News released a report stating that the IACHR released a report stating that the government violated the rights of the Akawayos in Isinero. Yeah. What is the government's response?
So I discussed this matter with Gail Teixeira, and they intend to respond to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And she said the tenure of the response will be that we don't agree with their findings. I believe these bodies are alienated from what is happening here, and often they're activist bodies and very subjected to individual hypes. If they were to come to this country and compare indigenous people with any part of Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of benefits from government directly and on all the basic things, on education, healthcare, employment opportunities, water, housing, you will see that not a single country in this hemisphere, in the OAS, has treated indigenous people the way we have done. You ask the same body whether any of these countries have an Amerindian Act, whether they have an Amerindian Act. We have an Amerindian Act, which outlines a clear pathway to dealing with land questions. We defined when a community is eligible to apply for title lands. They have to have a certain number and be resident there for 25 years. We outlined a process in which the ministry has obligation. You check the entire Latin America whether they have done so. You check in Latin America if indigenous people, like when we got into office, they had 6% title land. Today it's close to 15% of Guyana. 15% of Guyana. Whether any country in this hemisphere has done that. You find out whether the countries in this hemisphere have a dedicated ministry for indigenous or Amerindian development, indigenous development. No, the answer is no. Whether there's a constitutional commission in any country in this hemisphere for indigenous people, like we have the Indigenous Peoples Commission as part of the Constitution. None of that. Whether they have a body similar that's recognized by the government and supported by the government, like the NTC, full support of the government. Our record on indigenous people's treatment is way, way above any Latin America country where indigenous people live. So to go and say Chinese landing and it's an Isenaru. These are two matters. They're taken by the APA, the same APA that is trying to block the LCDS funds to 242 Amerindian villages. It's an activist kind of body. And Gail Tisher is right that we should question their knowledge of this country and our national policies, because it seems as though they don't look at these things. Absolutely none of this. And if they were to look at it, they would probably withdraw this report or this I don't know, it's findings that they had, because it's based on partisan sort of advocacy. So we're going to respond. She said that our ministry is crafting the response. Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Two more. Right. So you mentioned that the cabinet is looking at the matter referring to the GPF using the N-word. Has
The Negro word, not N-word. It's a Negro word. It's N-word is a different word, right? Because that's what Nigel Hughes and the others are trying to make it look like, because that has international connotations. If you say N-word, people think it's a different word. It's a word Negro that they've been using, and East Indian that they've been using in the police force. And if it's time to change it, we're all for changing it. You don't hear any government official saying this. The same Felix was using this all the time. And now he holding a public meeting to say we must change it. Never once raised that with me when he was commissioner of police. He was commissioner of police under me. You think any day he said, Mr. President, could you change this word? I feel uncomfortable with my staff writing this word. He never did. He wasn't uncomfortable then. Nigel Hughes wasn't uncomfortable until the Kidaki Amsterdam issue. He wasn't uncomfortable because he was going to quote all the statements that I have here with me tons of cases where Nigel Hughes clients, he saw the statements. That's the way it was described historically throughout the whole period. Now suddenly they have an issue because they want to make it look, they need something. They need something to create unease and to spread racism in this country. These are the dying, fight against a group, a growingly desperate group.
My question.
Okay.
So the government is scheduled to resume talks with TTU on June 10th. And in the meantime, is government concerned about the learning loss that children may have experienced?
Yeah, we're very concerned, and we think it's unreasonable. And if you want to negotiate, they believe that we should negotiate on the duress too. You shouldn't negotiate on the duress. So the thing is that at some point in time, we're starting to work on several models. This e-school model, as I said before, maybe in the future, if we have a proper e-school model, then parents can choose that rather than physical school. That's in the future. But it must be, a child must be able, even going through an e-school system, to be able to get the same level of tuition and have the same level of successes as if they were going to physical school. And we should present it as an option to the parents of this country. Secondly, we have to, in the future, examine whether we'll give parents a voucher to send their children to a private school or not. Because if we're spending $700,000 now per child, and it costs $300,000 to pay for the school fees for the child, we might as well give in some areas the parents the $700,000 per child, and then let them pay for the school kids. And what this will do too, this will present more opportunities for private schools. So we would have to explore that too. And thirdly, we are not going to compromise on this issue that as we go to a world-class education, you can't be teaching our children anymore with 2 subjects CXC. In the past, we may have accommodated that. We will provide you an opportunity to upgrade. We're going to pay for your scholarship, but you have to study. if you're in the environment, because we want better quality teachers. So that will have to happen in the future. And people don't want to do that, because as you go up, you can earn more with degrees and everything else. You start getting higher allowances. And that's where we will focus the increases, to the most qualified teachers in the future, that you have to do that. Then we have to look at performance too. Many people, when you look at the average school attendance for teachers in school, so we have like 14,000 teachers. And even before the strike, only 70% were going to school. So on every given day, we had about 4,000 teachers who were not teaching. About 4,000 teachers who were not teaching because of, they absent on a daily basis. Now, not all of them on every day, but different ones. So you have to look at that. And the head teachers too have to bear more responsibility in the future. And clearly, if some of the schools, I've had cases like 2 schools now where all the teachers wanted to work and the head teacher doesn't want them to work and threaten them if they do work, then there'd be consequences. Well, there should be consequences against that head teacher. And if they're intimidating people, then they should not benefit from none of the concessions we're getting. Because like the duty free and everything else, if you are intimidating, you have a freedom to strike. You can withdraw your labor, but you shouldn't intimidate others who you want to go to work. They're closing, the people go with their kids to school in some of the school, and they head teacher and some of the teachers shutting the door in the morning, telling them go home. They can't do that. So this is, and again, we're making it clear. We have appealed the case. We have appealed the case. When I look at the right to strike versus the freedom to strike that the judge ruled on, whether it was right to strike or freedom to strike, you can't strike and receive pay. If you strike and receive pay, no framer of the Constitution could have intended that. How could the parliamentarians or me as president who assented to that, did they ask me what was in my head? How would I as president assent to constitutional changes that say you can now work but receive pay in this country at any level, not just teachers, through the government and in the private sector too? Where in the world you would find a mad set of legislators like that, or the president of any country agreeing to that? That was in the mind. You have to go into the mind of the framers of the Constitution. And if you look at the recommendations from the Constitutional Reform Commission, it came as the right to strike, but in the Constitution was changed to freedom to strike. Because a right connotates that, you may be able to get paid, but even the right, you shouldn't be paid for. This is the utter nonsense. And that's why we believe this will be overturned. It's absurd. It will be overturned, and all people who are on strike will not be paid. We're making it clear. So whilst we want to work, we are prepared to engage the teachers, the teachers union, on the way going forward. Nobody ever talks about the $2 billion of dues that they collect. Every time I raise that, they've collected $2 billion of dues and not accounted for a cent. They've not accounted for a cent. The same teachers union. The general secretary shouldn't be a member of parliament based on their own rules, the union rules. But she is a member of parliament. People don't raise these things. And the children are affected mostly. The children, they're coming back to the point. I saw they said they're willing to adjust to come from 22 or something like that now. We've made it clear. You want a multi-year agreement? Let's talk about a multi-year agreement. We're prepared to talk about a multi-year agreement going forward from 2024. And that remains our position. So we want to work with this sector. We have trained more teachers than in the last 4 years than ever in the history of our country. 4,000 on Gold Scholarship and another 2,000 finished Cyril Potter College. That's about 6,000 of 14,000. That's about 40% of the teachers in 4 years went or paid for by the government of Guyana. And so the matter is highly politicized. Once Coretta MacDonald is there, you're not going to have a resolution to this matter. They want to keep it alive. They want to keep it alive so that they can use it politically. And we've seen statements like that already. People praising Coretta for taking the political fighters from the other side. Yes, please.
Founder Manakshan, the Guyana Times. Sir, can you give an update on the Marriott Hotel sale? Have you heard at all from Mr. Batrawi's company whether they're still interested in going forward? And also, can you say if government has heard from the U.S. Exim Bank on the loan for the gas to energy project? You had said in the second quarter, I believe.
Yes. So the thing is that the last report I got from Ashley saying they've been dealing with this from our embassy there is that it's being prepared at the technical level. They came, they did the environmental assessment on their own. So that was a good thing that they came because of the attempt by these local people linking up with foreign NGOs to try to block it. So there was an independent assessment of the entire project, including the environmental issues. And so I think as soon as that report is ready, then it will go to the board. I don't know exactly when, but I believe maybe a month or two. I have to find out from Ashley. I didn't follow up on that. But right now the project is moving forward, and we're paying for it. We're paying for it from our resources. So it's moving forward. So we're not desperate. We are at a point where we have to stop this project because the loan is not coming through. And we have a number of alternatives too that I explained this in the past, that we're not a party or a government that don't have contingencies. So this project will be built. The gas to energy project will be completed. It will deliver 300 megawatts of power. It would produce stable, cheaper electricity to the people of this country. And also, from that project, we'll start becoming a net exporter, an exporter of cooking gas from an importer now. And we will be able to pay back for this project, even from the proceeds of the sale of the liquids. That's it, and we are firm in that. It's going to happen. So this is where, and what's there?
The Marriott Hotel.
Oh, the Marriott. So I don't think that company, the offer revolves a lot around that gentleman. So there is a second rank bidder, but I don't know where Nissel is in the discussion with the second rank bidder. But I said the last time I spoke on this matter, just after the man passed away, that we are not desperate to sell the Marriott. We're not desperate to sell the Marriott. So if the second offer is concluded, I think it's about $86 million. The first one was 91, and the second was $86 million. And if it doesn't go through, it's fine. The Marriott is still there, 100% owned by the government of Guyana, not me. As Glenn Lyle said, I own the Marriott there. Still got to come back to me. He promised me to bring me the details about a year and a half now, how I own the Marriott and who owned the Marriott. He didn't show back. There is no urgency. There is no urgency in any of these matters. It's state asset. It's there, and it has great value. It has great value, and I'm so pleased that we spent $50-something million, and we got like that off of nearly $90 million. Yes.
Dr. Jagdeo, good afternoon. Liron Bramall, NCN. Just two things. One, you spoke about miners not paying taxes to the gold board, not selling their gold to avoid taxes. From the investigation, is there an approximate value on how much taxes are being lost? And to tie to that, the gold smuggling, is there...
No. What I was saying is that the evasion, if you smuggle, you don't pay the royalty and the others. So it's a loss of taxes too. So that is what I meant by that. But the magnitude of the smuggling, I don't want to speculate, but we're going after the people who are doing it. And when I spoke about it about a couple of months back, we were dead serious about it. We're dead serious then, but there's been a lot of quiet work by the law enforcement agencies, and I want to say again that people who are involved, they're going to feel the full weight of the law enforcement agencies and the laws of Guyana.
And yesterday, a businessman, Frank Sanitran, if I can quote just to be sure, be prepared for significant price hikes in consumer goods and other items due to over 150% surge in freight costs. I know government has been putting a number of measures in place to address these issues. Is a discussion going to be
that
had?
Frank Sanitran, subsequently, I think he removed the post because what is clear is that when there was a price hike in freight, the freight charges moved from just around $2,500 and $3,500 for 20-foot and a 40-foot container to about $20,000 per container, just the freight to move it from China to Guyana, the same container, in the COVID period, because there were shortages. What we did is we kept the old freight rate constant. So you pay taxes on the CIF value of the goods, the cost, insurance, and freight. So if the costs remain the same and the insurance remain the same, if the freight had gone up significantly, that means our taxes would go up. So it would complicate them, it would even make it even more inflationary. We kept the old freight rate for the calculation of the taxes. So they did not pay any more taxes than they were paying before. So the entire growth in costs was the freight, the cost that they were paying, the increased cost for freight. So a lot of those people, when the freight rates came down back to $4,000, we still kept the old arrangement in place, the old rates, but the freight rates came down back. They never adjusted the price for the consumers. They kept the same selling price, but they had this huge benefit. So now the freight rate has gone up back. We don't believe that there should be major pass-through of these rates to the consuming public. So I would urge people not to buy from some of these people who are using every opportunity to almost gouge. They want to gouge the consumers. So I saw another businessman, I can show you, he posted that increases in taxes. There's no increase in taxes we're using because of the higher freight. We're using the old freight rate too. Might want to mention his company. No, maybe I shouldn't mention his company here. But they're planning to gouge people. Now, clearly the freight rate has gone up. And what has happened is because of what's happening in the Red Sea, because of the Yemenis, the Houthi, the vessels can't traverse that sea. They have to come all the way around. So that has pushed up the cost of freight. And then the bottleneck in the Panama Canal. Those two things have impacted. So in any inflation here, it's not driven by domestic policies. It's largely because of these two events, which we are hoping to abate, because if Israel's unconscionable attack on the Palestinian people were to end, that would abate the situation back, hopefully, in the Red Sea. And then I think the Panama Canal, because it was in the drought period, they had water shortages there. So that's coming back to normalcy. But I think some of these people are looking to gouge the consumers all the time. Many of them never adjusted their rates downwards from the COVID period. And we have, by keeping the rate constant, On an average, we probably give up about to $8 billion a year by keeping the lower freight costs so that they don't have to pay higher taxes. So you lose $5 to $8 billion of revenue. And all of the other interventions we have made is to keep their prices constant. We have fared better than other countries, but still there is inflationary pressure only because of the imported inflation, not because of what we're doing. So I want to urge people to go carefully and shop sensibly.
Sorry. There have
And
been-
I spoke with the commissioner yesterday too, and he said to me that the average value of the containers, the declared value, is significantly lower than the real value too. So maybe we should look at on the declared prices for some of these people. Yeah.
Dr. Jagdeo, there have been a number of international reports about Russia sending warships to the Caribbean and with possible stops in Venezuela. Is this something government has been made aware of, and can you comment on it?
We're made aware of it. The president has spoken to several people in the region. The view is that shared by some of our partners is that it's not something that we should worry about, that it doesn't represent a direct threat to Guyana or Guyana's interests. Nevertheless, we're vigilant and we're keeping this issue firmly in our policy radar.
Dr. Jagdeo, good afternoon, and also Williams Culture News.
Yes.
I believe it was 2 weeks ago, I would have asked you a question in relation to Guyana probably not being able to benefit from a $2 billion guarantee if Exxon is pumping above the safety limits. And you would have said that you would have reached out to the EPA with a number of questions that included, have you received that report back from the EPA or response from
The
them?
EPA sent me a letter that they received from the president of ExxonMobil here, Alistair Routledge. And he said that they discussed this with their insurers and that this is part of that they're working according to plan, and therefore it doesn't represent a threat. So I asked, and they had a reply. EPA wrote, and the reply came from ExxonMobil.
Great.
That
Secondly,
the policy would be honored. Yeah.
thank you. Secondly, can you say if there have been any recent updates with the discussions with the government and Exxon in relation to the second audits? Because you would have mentioned 2 weeks back that letters were written. So
Well,
have you gotten a response?
I don't track that because that's a routine function. What I know now that they have sent that letter off to Exxon because I would assume that it had gone after I told you. And last week I called and they had not sent it as yet, closing off the first audit. So that was sent. And this one is a routine engagement between the GRA and Exxon and possibly the auditors. When it gets to a stage where the GRA says to us, these are the final, this is the final advice, that's when, as policymakers, we'll get back. So this is how much we'll accept, and this is what we will not accept. So when I don't report or engage in the routine discussion, it's only when it comes to a level where you're required to make a policy input. That's when we get involved.
If I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, last week when a colleague of mine would have asked about the audit report, you said you didn't get to check it or you didn't check it yourself. So my question to you is, have you checked the audit report? And
The audit report that we receive is a full audit report. I think Dr. Glenn Lal is confusing elements. I saw Floyd Haynes. Did you see his response? Well, I think he was being very mild when he spoke about Glenn Lal and his capacity to understand these matters. Floyd Haynes and the people who do these audits, they're highly qualified technical people. And so I can understand the agony and the pain that they have to suffer when they have to respond to the daily ramblings of a guy who doesn't know anything. Can you imagine that? The pain that you have to suffer when someone boldly pronounces that he has discovered the new world, like Christopher Columbus. He just discovered a new metal on the, on Earth. And it's all nonsense. And then you have to, on a daily basis, weekly basis, respond to these things. These people are professionals. They have financial firms in Washington, merchant bank, and it is really something that I don't know. I can handle it because I'm a politician too. So I can, on a weekly basis, give him a little cussing and expose his mediocrity or stupidity. But for those people who are busy and they are investing, and for them, for their integrity to be impugned every week by a near madman, it must be troubling, because these guys live in a financial world. And when you write in the newspapers that they were compromised in the audit, or they didn't do a complete audit, and you can't even spell the word audit, then you are really doing a disservice to those people. And so I should apologize to people like Floyd Haynes, to them, and this is welcome to Guyana. Well, he's Guyanese, so he knows a bit of it, but I still think it bothers people like him that we have to suffer through this every week. Yes, please.
And finally, can you say if the US $2 billion guarantee that we have, if it covers our Caribbean neighbors?
I see the Trinidad and right, the Trinidadian concern and stuff like that. The Caribbean neighbors cater for Guyana. Do they cater? You think the Trinidadians, when you ask them, what if they have an oil spill? Do they have money to cover our liabilities here? Just ask them that. Yes. I said the president, yes, has been in contact with our partners, and our partners. So there are several people. I had a chat with him this morning, and there are several, but our partners, yeah. Thank you.